Good morning. Welcome to Who's Left This Week, the unapologetically progressive Sunday morning political news show for Indiana. Our opening theme is by Hoosier singer-songwriter Leslie Nuss. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I'm broadcasting from Bloomington. We've got another busy week in the news, the continuing war in Iran, Jeffrey Epstein brought back to life by Melania Trump, of all people, and Hoosiers really don't want data centers in their neighborhoods. I've got a couple great guests to join me talking about all of that and why these stories matter to Hoosiers. But first, you know the drill. This is an independent media project. We don't paywall content. We don't have advertisers. We certainly don't have billionaire benefactors. Only individuals like you keep this thing going. It is a foundational principle of Who's Left and the Progressive Indiana Network that we refuse to hide important information behind paywalls in the middle of a political crisis, even if that's not in our financial best interest. So please, if you find value in this work, and it is a lot of work, go to progressiveindiana.net and subscribe at the paid level. It is only $5 a month or $50 a year to help us build the infrastructure that will pop the right-wing media bubble in this state. And if a paid subscription isn't in the cards for you right now, that's okay. You can still help out by liking and sharing on social media, commenting, leaving reviews, providing feedback, forwarding our content to your people. You get us when you can. Mostly, we just want you here in this community of Hoosiers dedicated to making the state and its government work for all of us, not just the elite few. Please join us. You can follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads at whosleft.us. That's also my website, and on Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube at Who's Left. That's HOOS Left. Progressive Indiana Network's handle is the full spelled out name on most sites, but on Blue Sky and TikTok, it is PIN Indiana. Please help us grow with a follow wherever you're at. Tell the others. Let's build a radically democratic Indiana together. Now, let's welcome our week's guest to the show. First time on the Sunday show, but not the first time with me here at Who's Left. There is Knox County Democratic Party chair and co-host of the Left of Midlife podcast, who had me so graciously just a few weeks ago. There's Marsha Fleming. Marsha, good morning.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
So glad to have you here on the Sunday show. I'm excited to hear what you've got to say about a busy week in the news.
Can I just say I don't ever want to be on again after a 2-week after a 1-week hiatus, because the list of potential topics was so long today, my head almost exploded. But we will power through as always.
Week around here, Marsha. Hey, why don't you tell the folks about yourself? If I missed anything, maybe give them a little brief overview of what you're all about down there in the Vincennes area.
All right. Well, I'm very excited. We have two folks, actually three folks sitting in southern Indiana today. I'm over on the Wabash River in Vincennes. Lived here about 22 years with my wife Lisa and our two spoiled cats, and for the last 5 years have been the chair of the Knox County Democrats, and more recently, as you mentioned, the host of Left of Midlife podcast with my pal Tiffany Arthur, the chair of Davies County Dems.
Fantastic. So it seems every time, Marsha, you come around here, we pair you with a dynamic young man, and today is no different. Joining us is president of the College Democrats at Indiana University. It's Isaac Chapman-Whitehead. Isaac, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Scott. And Marsha, I just have to say, my sister and I, my family, were big fans of the Spirit of Vincennes, the Rendezvous. This summer, big fans of attending that every year. It's religiously, we attend that every year.
Well, we can maybe get together and have some strawberry shortcake or something here in a few weeks.
Oh, yes.
Hey, Isaac, where can the good folks find you before we get going here today?
The good folks can find me. They can find me on Instagram. I do have a Facebook account. I don't use it too much. I just use it to peruse, but you can find me on Instagram at isaac.cw. You can also find the College Democrats at IU at Democrats at IU on Instagram. We have a Facebook page, and we're going to start activating it up again this year, particularly as the summer goes on, or once the summer really starts. But that's where you can find me, and that's where you can find College Democrats at IU.
All right. Very good. Well, I'm glad to have you both here. Let's dig into a meaty week of the news. And we're going to start somewhere I don't normally go, and that is church. So last week, as you all know, was Easter. I took the week off here for the first time since I started this show, breaking my long streak of something like 46 weeks in a row hosting this thing. It was good to rest, but that also means we got some catching up to do. And, last week on Easter, we saw two conflicting versions of Christianity. And in the week leading up to Easter, during Holy Week, for the first time, Pope Leo began to call out this Iran war and named Trump by name and urged him to find an off-ramp. He spent his first 11 months on the job kind of quietly assessing the Vatican internally before Trump's war thrust him into an unavoidably public confrontational role. This is the same week that our Secretary of War, at least that's what he calls himself, Pete Hegseth, holding a Pentagon prayer service on Good Friday, asking God for overwhelming violence of action against those who deserve no mercy. And, this is very much a direct contrast to Leo's Palm Sunday peace message. Now, we found out this week, apparently in January, that the Pentagon, Elbridge Colby is the guy's name, one of our liaisons there at the Department of Defense, summoned the Vatican diplomat Cardinal Christophe Pierre and warned the Pope's envoy that the U.S. can do whatever it wants militarily. This is according to the Daily Beast and the Independent, who also had this story. The U.S. official invoked the Avignon papacy. This is when France militarily dominated the church in the 1300s. Very much, hey, a nice church you got here. It'd be a shame if something happened kind of moment. And Leo also declined an invitation to the White House to celebrate July 4th, instead choosing it to spend with African immigrants to Europe on an island in the Mediterranean there. This is the first American Pope saying, I don't want anything to do with this on our 250th birthday. The Pope denouncing yesterday this delusion of omnipotence, as he called it, saying that fuels the U.S.-Israeli war in Iran. He presided over evening prayer services at St. Peter's Basilica and directly challenged leaders like Hegseth who use God to justify violence. The Pope saying, quote, enough of the idolatry of self and money, enough of the display of power, enough of war. It is here in the church, I suppose, that he was referring to, that we find a bulwark against the delusion of omnipotence that surrounds us and is becoming increasingly unpredictable and aggressive. Even the holy name of God, the God of life, is being dragged into discourses of death. Marsha, it's an unusual situation to find oneself in where you're getting outflanked on your left by the Catholic Church.
And a position long term, I'm not sure that they really want to be in. Have we really thought that through exactly? But I'm like you, Scott. I'm not particularly religious. I was raised in a faith tradition, a Protestant mainline faith tradition. But really, Easter is one of those rare moments where even non-religious people pause. We think about renewal and responsibility. It happens in the spring. There are other religious holidays around that same time. And so I think this is one of the reasons why the contrast of the two, the Trump administration, Trump's tweets, twats, cheeps, chirps, whatever they are, and I'm gonna call him the Secretary of Defense. I'm not gonna call him the Secretary of War, so he can keep that part. You had one message using faith-infused language alongside military triumphalism, and then Pope Leo's, of course, explicitly saying that no one gets to use God to justify their war. Of course, he said Christians can't surrender our indifference or domination, and of course, that really matters right now. And in the end, I don't think this comes down to one politician versus another. It's really more about whether we believe that moral language should slow the rush to violence or accelerate it. So I'm less interested in individuals than patterns here, because as we've seen with everything in the Trump administration, Whether they believe it or not, words matter, especially when they're spoken by people with power. So when language blesses violence, it basically normalizes it. And when language urges restraint, on the other hand, it rehumanizes everyone. And Easter obviously gave us two very different examples of that. I think Pope Leo was calling out something bigger than any individual, the idea that power equals righteousness.
Isaac, I don't know if you were a religious man or if you're a student of the world religions, like I consider myself, even though I am not a particularly religious person. But I don't know, man. It seems like the Pope is reflecting the words of, what's that guy's name? Jesus, and Mr. Hegseth and Mr. Trump, as we'll see here momentarily, seem to have lost that message in translation somewhere.
Yeah, well, I'll say my own background. So I am religious. I've been baptized and raised a Methodist, but I attended a Catholic school, and I was in first grade, and I have a lot of friends who are Catholic, and there's actually a lot of folks in College Democrats at IU who are Catholic, and I have a lot of respect for His Holiness and some of the teachings of the Catholic Church. But all that is to say, I think Pope Leo's and when Marsha was talking about with respect to patterns, I think that's a big thing with what I've read on church tradition. And when Pope Leo ascended, I was trying to get all this information about this new Pope, this American Pope, what have you. And like the significance of the name Leo. The last Leo, the Leo the 13th, way back when, during beginning of the end of the 19th and about much of the early 20th century. And he was this Pope that came in during this new industrial revolution, and had to and grappling with this rising inequality we saw, like these new machines that were supposed to make life better, but then grappling that with this rapid inequality and then rising war. And I'm sure Pope Leo the 14th did not expect some of this, the war parts of that's where his papacy would go. We're not even a year into his papacy, but going back to patterns, the church, the Catholic Church, especially here in the United States, has always, and elements of organized religion, has always been willing to, dissent from when government has decided to err and to be, that's an understatement, to err. But I think Pope Leo he's been some people are surprised. I don't know how. I'm not surprised when we know that a lot of this is being spurred on by the White House, by the administration, that keeps pushing and pushing and pushing. And Pope Leo and the Vatican, they're just responding, just like, hey, look, they're just responding. And politically, you'd think, Mr. President, I don't know if there's anyone sensible in the White House now to say this. Like politically, it's a bit. Like morally, it's bad. It's bad. And there's a lot to say, but I think Pope Leo is he's hitting all the notes he needs to. And you can call that the Holy Spirit helping him. Call that what have you.
Let's talk about whatever kind of spirit possessed the president of the United States on Easter Sunday, and look at his message from His Holiness the Donald, right? And then on Easter Sunday, he posted to his broke down Twitter knockoff the following quote. He said, "Tuesday will be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day, all wrapped up in one in Iran. There will be nothing like it. Open the fucking straight, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. Praise be to Allah." And Trump told ABC News the conflict should end in a couple days, but if not, we're blowing up the whole country. and said very little was off the table. Now, we should mention here that targeting power plants and bridges follows earlier threats to hit desalination plants, all of which international law experts say would violate humanitarian law, which is a thing that we used to at least give lip service to around here in this country. On Monday, the day after Easter, the strikes continued in the area, with the U.S. hitting military targets only, thankfully, on Kharg Island, where much of Iran's oil infrastructure is. Vice President J.D. Vance said civilian infrastructure was still on hold pending Iranian proposals. Now, then, on Tuesday morning, Trump posted, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. However, now we have complete and total regime change where different, smarter, and less radical loves mind prevail. Maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen. Who knows? We'll find out tonight. One of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world." 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death, he says, will finally end, and God bless the great people of Iran. So escalating each day, threatening war crimes, giving this artificial deadline of 8 p.m. Tuesday night, right in prime time. Marsha, what did you make of Trump's ramblings online and his threats toward Iran?
Well, I'm a word girl. My history goes back to journalism.
We loved that show when my kids were young.
What?
Word Girl. PBS, man.
Oh, okay. That was after my time. I'm more of a Sesame Street, Zoom vintage. But again, the words matter. What stood out was not the threat itself, but how quickly it was framed as negotiable. So 1 minute, maximalist language, we're annihilating everything, talk of destroying the power grid, all of these basic things that life depends on there. These aren't abstract military targets. They're conditions that make survival possible. Then almost as quickly, tone shifts. And the same voice that just invoked annihilation begins speaking about a ceasefire already happening, objectives supposedly met, diplomacy back on the table. So the violence was rhetorically pre-justified and then rhetorically erased. And that pivot matters. I mean, what are the kids calling it? Taco, right? But when threats against civilian infrastructure coexist with casual declarations of peace, then basically force stops being a last resort, and now it's a negotiating ploy. Obviously we're seeing, as we talked about with the church, moral language doesn't restrain power, at least not in this administration. So the danger isn't inconsistency, it's normalizing that pattern of behavior and language. So when we speak of destruction lightly, and ceasefires are treated as, flip-flops, however we're feeling that day, then the signal to the world stage is that human cost is secondary to the leverage that we feel that we have. So, the Trump administration has proved that they don't know how to do diplomacy, that diplomacy is basically dead in our current system. But seriously, threatening civilian infrastructure, power, water systems into collective punishment, no. When that level of threat is introduced and then casually walked back, it doesn't normalize diplomacy. It normalizes the idea that civilian suffering is an acceptable bargaining chip.
Yeah, we've got this situation where we've got the people in charge of this country now think the Geneva Convention is woke and needs to be treated dismissively. Isaac, Marsha mentioned the taco, right? The Trump always chickens out trope. And wouldn't you know it, like clockwork, by 8 o'clock that night, the U.S. and Iran reached a tentative 2-week ceasefire less than 2 hours before the deadline. Now, as part of the agreement, Trump said the U.S. and Israel would suspend bombing Iran for 2 weeks, subject to Iran following through on its commitment to reopen the Strait of Hormuz for safe passage during the ceasefire period. Both sides claimed victory. Trump says military objectives were met. Iran says the U.S. agreed to the general framework of its 10-point peace proposal, which which, among other things, required the lifting of all sanctions and UN resolutions against Iran, alongside the release of Iranian assets held overseas. Other demands include the withdrawal of U.S. combat forces from military bases across the region, reparations in the form of compensation for the damage they've taken during this conflict, and Iran's right to nuclear enrichment. Doesn't sound like Trump got a whole lot of anything. It kind of gave away the farm if you look at things that way. But what do you make of this whole? Trump chickens out. Good in this situation, right? Like, we don't want him bombing civilian infrastructure. So, I mean, that's a positive development, eh?
I think this whole thing with Iran has, well, first, my reaction when heard that the ceasefire had happened. Well, when the ceasefire had happened, and then when it ended, at first, I was reading through, it seemed like there was some discrepancy between Israel and the United States on whether Lebanon and Iran, on whether Lebanon was included in that. And then wouldn't you know it, the next day, Israel is invading southern Lebanon and the ceasefire sort of breaks and we're back to square one. And so my reaction to a lot of this has been more so, I mean, the president going along with a foreign policy that is the Israeli government's, and the Israeli government more so being one of the biggest instigators in pushing the administration to just up out of nowhere begin just carpet bombing Tehran and killing their supreme leader, and then sort of going from a regime that was generally not ambivalent to building a nuclear weapon. I think they were more. So the former Supreme Leader Khamenei had a fatwa against building nuclear weapons. I both because of faith, or his faith, but also because of as a negotiating thing during the first nuclear deal. And then you have a new Supreme Leader who, saw his dad, his wife, his kid, I think his kids too, his family murdered. He himself barely escapes. A lot of his friends, family gets killed, his country under attack. And the administration parroting that as, oh, it's a win, we have not a hardliner, we have a reformer, what have you. And it's like, no. So what I make of it all as a 21-year-old man who is otherwise generally fit for a military service draft, I watch with some exhaustion and just trying to go about my day-to-day life while still trying to keep up to date with things, and just concern. I think just immense concern and trying to put that back into what can I do in my own life to boost morale for those around me. And that's about, as of right now, that's about all I can do. And that's sort of been my reaction.
So, I guess, again, like, we're glad that Trump didn't go through with these threats, but the fact that he's making them is disgusting. Now, the first thing I thought when we get to this 8 o'clock deadline and nothing happens is like, oh, okay, somebody's making money on this because there's a pattern of this sort of thing happening. And wouldn't you know it, it turns out that newly created Polymarket accounts bet big on this ceasefire in the hours before Trump's announcement. Several newly created accounts placed hundreds of thousands in yes bets on a ceasefire hours before the announcement, while his public rhetoric was still threatening to annihilate a civilization, right? And this mirrors earlier suspicious betting patterns before the capture of Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela and before previous Iran military actions. Same platform, same timing, same new account pattern. Now both Polymarket and Kalshi, another prediction market platform have acknowledged this problem, and bipartisan legislation is pending to extend insider trading laws to the prediction markets. Representative Richie Torres called for a probe into futures trading, placed ahead of the March pause in Iran hostility, calling for the SEC to probe $500 million in crude oil futures trades made in the 15 minutes before Trump announced a pause in Iran strikes last month. Potentially the largest insider trading case in history. Like we said, there is bipartisan legislation that Torres has pending to bar federal officials and political appointees from trading event contracts based on non-public government information. It has 42 Democratic co-sponsors, but wouldn't you know it, is dead in the Republican House. And this is the second time Torres has raised this alarm. The first was after a Polymarket account made $400,000 on the Maduro ouster at the beginning of January, and a separate group of House Democrats has also written to the Consumer Financial Trade Commission demanding answers. Marsha, wouldn't you know it? It's all a grift with these guys.
Well, always. And it's super uncomfortable, super squicky when wars, ceasefires, regime change become tradable contracts. I mean, and let's think back to history. What happens when we let some of these markets go a little nutty and crazy and don't have any oversight? I wonder. But basically we're saying public life goes from accountability to arbitrage. And so that's why this Torres legislation really matters, right? It's not about banning prediction markets outright. It's about reinstating the moral firewall, making clear that government service and insider knowledge aren't wagers to cash in on. I think that's, what we're seeing several Indiana candidates become involved in the take back the backpack to, outlaw any personal trading by members of Congress. They're kind of signing on to this moral compact. But as someone who is in midlife right now, there's a bit of cultural irony here that I can't help but think about. Martha Stewart became a midlife icon because insider trading in ordinary equities is treated as a serious breach of trust. She went to prison, for Christ's sakes. So now we're debating on whether the timing of a war or a ceasefire with possible advanced knowledge is just another market signal. I mean, if that doesn't feel like a category error, we may have normalized more than we realize. And as Martha would say, that is not a good thing.
Oh, very well played, Marsha. Isaac, I mean, listen, there's got to be a way around it, though. I mean, I think these prediction markets in general should not exist. We've got a gambling problem in this country that's gotten really bad over the last couple of years, but these Polymarket and Kalshi really take this thing to a whole new level, don't they?
I would say, very much so. Very much so. I mean, when it comes to betting, historically, when it comes to betting on, significant, historic events, going way back to the papal conclaves, that's always been a big thing for 500 years there. But with this new Kalshi and what have you, if there's a way that these folks can make a grift on it, they seem to find a way. And my reaction has been just a sigh, really. It's not surprising. It's nothing new. At least I'm not surprised to hear it. And I'm not a big fan of Congressman Torres generally, and I think he should be primaried. And I think he is a good primary challenger, I think, in state, Senator Michael Blake. But that being said, I think this legislation should even be, I don't know if it probably won't get through Congress, but it's been important that it's been proposed, and it's important the ball is now rolling on it. And it's important that we have folks, especially folks who are running for Congress here in Indiana, that are behind it. And it's one small step in what is probably going to take a lot of courage and a lot of elbow grease to restore any sort of trust back in elected officials in the American government, which if it was at rock bottom, it's like in hell right now.
Yeah, man. It's time to tear this thing down to the studs for sure. I'm not a burn it down guy, but I'm definitely a massive remodeling job kind of guy. So I want to come back to the war itself here. And Isaac, you hinted at this, that there is some confusion as to whether this thing included Lebanon. And not 4 hours after Trump's announcement that there was a ceasefire reached, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office issued a statement welcoming the ceasefire while stressing that it does not cover Lebanon. Netanyahu said, quote, Israel supports President Trump's decision to suspend strikes against Iran for 2 weeks, subject to Iran immediately opening the straits and stopping all attacks on the U.S., Israel, and countries in the region. The Prime Minister's office issued that in English only, which is unusual. Now, Lebanon, in the hours after this ceasefire took effect in Iran, Israel launched 100+ airstrikes across southern Lebanon in under 10 minutes, killing at least 250 people and wounding nearly 1,200 with no warnings given. The strikes hit densely populated residential areas of Beirut that had been spared for months, including neighborhoods far away from any Hezbollah presence. Analysts say Netanyahu is racing to maximize operational achievements in Lebanon before a final U.S.-Iran deal forces him to stop. Now, Pakistan, who negotiated this ceasefire, reiterated that, yeah, in fact, Lebanon is still part of this ceasefire. Their Prime Minister, Shahbaz Sharif, who played a key role in brokering the deal, announced on Tuesday that Iran and the United States of America, along with their allies, have agreed to an immediate ceasefire everywhere, including Lebanon and elsewhere, effective immediately. Their ambassador to the U.S., Rizwan Saeed Sheikh, also said on Wednesday afternoon that this was not the agreement the parties reached on Tuesday. Israel's Lebanon assault is being characterized by some foreign policy analysts as a deliberate attempt to blow up the ceasefire over which Israel had been sidelined, and it worked. So, for their part, Iran is like, oh, okay, well, we're breaking the ceasefire. Well, in that case, Strait of Hormuz, close back down. They reclosed it after Israel's Lebanon strikes with just 7 ships passing per day versus the normal 140. These passages through the strait had to be negotiated with the military of Iran. They're demanding tolls for safe passage through the state, and an idea that Trump himself had previously floated, by the way. But of course, even though he came up with this idea, he posted, they better not be, and if they are, they better stop now. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who hasn't been seen in public since taking over, vowed retribution and promised to take management of the strait to a new phase. So, what do we think? I mean, Marsha, do you tend to agree with these analysts that Netanyahu doesn't actually want a ceasefire?
Well, clearly, I mean, he has his own agenda. I mean, two big concerns of mine. One is the Strait of Hormuz going to become a toll bridge or a toll strait, and who's benefiting off of that? That's a question. But the other thing that in all of this, when we talk about stability in the region, that concerns me, and I kind of picked up on this, was listening to the Bulwark this past week, and Applebaum with The Atlantic, who has spent lots of time discussing the region in her past work, brought up the idea that where in all of this are we actually talking to Iranians? And I'm not talking about Iranian, leadership necessarily as it revolves around a ceasefire, but what about Iranian expats? What about normal people? I mean, the Bush administration even did that during the Iraq War. And so the fact that Trump comes on his tweets and basically says, this is happening, I think he thinks that he has the ability to make it all happen. And he's not, like always, considering all of the players here, all the stakeholders, we would say, in our policy speak in the U.S. It's like, what about the everyday Iranians? And what do they want for their country?
Isaac, what do the everyday Iranians want for their country? What do everyday Israelis want for their country? I mean, we understand that Netanyahu is not a popular man. They've got elections coming up this year. If he can keep this war going, he can say, well, steady hand at the wheel, right?
Oh, yeah. And, well, I won't be as bold as to say I know what the Israeli and Iranian public so wants, but I can take a guess that what they want is just an end to not have to worry about a bomb flying over their head or bombing their family or killing them, just not having to live in fear like folks have for the last 2 years, almost about 2-3 years. And, when it was, and in that time, tens of thousands gone. And so what I will say, what I'll say is this, that, thanks for home. What I'll say is this, that I think the real, that's what I'm trying to find. All that is to say, I think peace. I think that's, a lot of folks are just exhausted. That's what I'll say with that. There's a lot that could be said, but exhaustion, and they want peace.
So I guess moving toward peace, maybe the United States and Iran have been negotiating in Pakistan over the last several days. Vice President J.D. Vance was negotiating, maybe not directly, but through proxies with Iranian Parliament Speaker Ghalibaf, a former Revolutionary Guard member. Well, it says they held direct face-to-face talks in Islamabad, the most substantive U.S.-Iran negotiations since the 2015 nuclear deal reached under President Obama. Now, the sides still remain far apart. The U.S. wants to restrict Iran's nuclear program and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is demanding compensation for the strikes, release of frozen assets, and an end to Israeli attacks on Hezbollah. The U.S. apparently began mine-clearing operations in the Strait regardless of the outcome, with President Trump telling reporters, whether we make a deal or not makes no difference to me. And Israel continued striking Lebanon throughout the talks, with the Lebanese death toll now surpassing 2,000 people, while Iranian state TV noted serious differences remained at the table. And I guess this morning, even after I've finished writing my script for today, negotiations are over without a deal having been reached. So I don't know, Marsha, was all of this for nothing? Where are we today relative to last week at this time?
Well, I do think we can look to some of the Republican response to all of this noise. With a lot of leaders, it's more calibrating than outright dissent. I mean, everyone's fearful of dissent, but you do have some far right voices in the podcast and independent media space that are basically like, nope, over 25. I think Alex Jones even said this week, can we 25th Amendment this guy? Candace Owens, Megyn Kelly. I mean, they're kind of getting on the train of this guy's really crazy. I'm like, what took you so long? but I mean, is this the canary in the coal mine? But by contrast, of course, we have our Indiana Republican delegation that's basically like, oh yeah, these threats, maximum leverage. We're going to get compliance, bring the conflict to a close. This from former Marine Todd Young. No, sorry, Todd. And then a whole passel of Indiana legislators basically looking at their phones. I'm looking at you, Aaron Houchin. It's like, are they representing us? No. But I'm watching the far right space, the people who are the loudest. Sometimes, obviously, they have a lot of power to sway public opinion. So we'll see.
Yeah, and by all accounts, any polling we've seen says that Republicans and MAGA are still very much lined up behind Trump, but we are seeing cracks, and they're coming from weird places. And along those lines, that's sort of where I wanted to go next. Is an eclectic bipartisan group is suddenly calling for removing Trump using the 25th Amendment. The whole "civilization will die tonight" post triggered calls to invoke the 25th from folks like you said, Marsha. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Alex Jones, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, Anthony Scaramucci. Now, invoking the 25th requires a majority of the cabinet plus the vice president to declare the president unfit. There's no sign that J.D. Vance or any cabinet member is actually considering this. Republican Senator Ron Johnson, who has always been in Trump's corner, a very, very far-right figure himself, maybe allegedly helped facilitate some of the January 6th stuff. He said Trump, quote, loses me if he attacks civilian targets. So this signals even loyal Senate allies saw the infrastructure strikes as illegal. Again, no removal is imminent, but the public breadth of the coalition calling for it is historically unprecedented. Now, Isaac, if the 25th is off the table, maybe impeachment is on the table. 70 Democrats, including Nancy Pelosi and Chris Murphy, have called on the cabinet to invoke the 25th. Representative John Larson of Connecticut filed impeachment articles against Trump over the Iran war, citing the whole civilization will die post as evidence of unfitness for office, with Larson saying, quote, Donald Trump has blown past every requirement to be removed from office, and it's getting worse. His illegal war in Iran is not only driving up prices for American families, it has cost American lives. He's becoming more unstable by the day. His profane and sacrilegious Easter Sunday and subsequent threats, including a whole civilization will die and open the strait or you'll be living in hell, not only foreshadow war crimes, but put our security at risk. Isaac, anything going to come of these?
Oh, absolutely not. I don't think. I think when I see the stuff when it comes to impeachment and what have you, what I want from Democrats, congressional Democrats, is not only, yes, aggressive oversight, but to start making a more firm opposite vision, affirmative vision for the country, not just domestically, but also abroad. And what I'll say on that, well, first of all, I'll say about this stuff with impeachment, what have you, is that I'm sure it plays well in some Democratic constituencies, some of these states, some of these members of Congress. But to me, it just sort of noise. And in terms of what I want to see, which could have had the DNC actually decide to do here last weekend, a couple days ago, in New Orleans, was vote, hey, we're not going to take dark money from folks like AIPAC. We're going to say this is a genocide going on in Gaza, in Palestine, and staking a firm stance, at least a firm stance, whatever that stance may be. And right now, it's just sort of this sort of mishmash. I think it just is it's leaving room for, it's leaving room for those voices that are on the right who themselves are holding the president to account. But in that case, the way they're doing it is sort of, it's like, yes, critiquing the president's relationship with the Israeli government, but then turning that into then broader anti-Semitic conspiracy, what have you. And so, all that is to say, I mean, if the president is impeached, come a Democratic Congress, I think that would be, I don't know if that's necessarily the right call, using impeachment as a sort of, well, it might be the right call by then. I mean, because every day's a new day, and the president just we don't know what he's going to do tomorrow.
Yeah, every day a new impeachable offense. Every
day's a new impeachable, exactly. and then if I think, but without that sort of opposite stark vision for the country, then it just becomes simply a vote of no confidence in the government, which we don't really have. Impeachment has sort of become that process in the United States, and at that point, it's like, what's there to turn to? And so what I take from it is, I think Democrats, congressional Democrats, federal Democrats need to start also staking out a different vision for the country, especially those who are wanting to run for president in 2028.
Yeah, you're 100% right. You know, speaking to the far right figures being right on Israel and their role in this thing, it's like, crap, they're right. They're right for the wrong reasons.
Right.
Could Democrats and Democratic leadership in particular try being right for the right reasons, or even just being right would be great. I want to look at the Indiana angle of this all. And Marsha sort of mentioned this. The WTHR had an article citing Indiana's congressional delegation and their reactions to Trump's deadline for the Iran bombing. Like you said, Todd Young, very, very deferential to Trump, thinks, he's playing maximum leverage and using escalatory language to force a quick end, not actually planning to commit war crimes. He's a master negotiator, right? Mm-hmm. Democratic Congressman Andre Carson, on the other hand, said Trump has no imminent threat justification, was drawn into the war by Netanyahu, and has only shown, quote, indecision, divisiveness, and recklessness. Both, however, agreed that rising gas prices are hurting Hoosiers, with Young releasing strategic petroleum reserves, and Carson noted it's only a temporary fix. Governor Mike Braun, along those lines, signed an executive order to pause the gas tax on for Hoosiers for 30 days, as prices have climbed over $4 a gallon here. Braun signing this executive order, suspending Indiana's 7% per gallon tax for 30 days. No legislation needed. Now, this covers only the sales tax, not the 36-cent excise tax, and it only covers gasoline, not diesel. Diesel's nearing $6 a gallon now. Braun said, quote, I want to be clear, House Democrats support this suspension, but Governor, I'm sorry, this is not Governor Braun. This is House Minority Leader Phil Giaquinta, who says that House Democrats support this suspension, but Governor Braun and State House Republicans are only cleaning up a mess that they helped create. Continuing, Hoosiers are tired of unstrategic and unfocused foreign wars that cost American lives, drive up gas prices, and raise the cost of living. Marsha, I guess you already spoke to Young and his sycophancy. Andre Carson, as is usual, is on the right side of this thing. What do you make of Braun suspending the gas tax? Does this actually help Hoosiers? Is this a Band-Aid on a broken arm? What are we doing here?
Plain and simple, straight up, it is a bait and switch. So this gas tax holiday may feel like it's relief at the pump, but what it does is it shifts the cost downstream. We kick the can down the road, because the sales tax feeds into the same revenue stream that is Indiana's Road and Bridge Fund for community crossings grants. So municipalities are going to feel this the same way they did SB 1. Less state money, more local strain. So Giaquinta puts his finger right on the pulse on the problem. This is Republicans reaching for a tool they have ignored for years, without a plan to backfill what is lost by cities and towns and localities. So drivers are going to save pennies today, but local governments are losing asphalt tomorrow. Full stop.
And Isaac, I guess we'll sort of wrap up this Iran war discussion and end it here with how it's affecting Hoosiers' daily lives. I hate to reduce there's war, there's death, there's violence, there's chaos in the Middle East. People are living with fear every day of their lives that it may be their last, that a bomb's going to fall on their head, and we're worried about a few cents off of the price of gasoline here. Do we need to get some perspective?
Do we need to get some perspective? I think it goes in to show why there's a really there's a quote from The West Wing, actually, where one the character who's a general goes, "All wars are crimes," and not only is it pains folks who are abroad, but also here now you could see clearly it's paining folks here at home. Hoosiers who have to drive for a living, especially driving into work. Say, take for example Vincennes. I'm trying to remember how far Vincennes is from, say, the Toyota plant in Gibson County in Princeton.
30 minutes.
30 minutes. Okay. Well, okay. And so taking that area as an example. So I know some folks here in Evansville, they drive the hour to Princeton, or about an hour to work. And you take into account the compounding economic stresses for families, especially since we have just a very car-centric society here in Indiana and what have you. That adds up, especially gas going from like $2.80 something. I don't remember what it was even before, to now, almost $4. Oh, okay. Guess I'm not driving as much. Or, okay. Guess I got to cut back here. And so if we have to get some perspective, I think the perspective that is most needed is a perspective that there are more, the victims of this violence are widespread. And obviously it varies as to the severity of the victims of violence face, but that we're all victims of this violence in many ways. And that then makes it more imperative for us to take a firm stand against war, especially against a war that is unjustified, just dumb. Actually, that's a better way to put it. It's just a dumb war started in the middle of nowhere, and both a war against another country, but also a war against Hoosiers here and Americans. So that's that perspective.
100%. Like, if it's not apparent by now, can we all please finally get it that Republicans are bad on the international front? They're bad on the national front, and they're bad here for Hoosiers at home. And hey, wouldn't you know it, we've got elections this year. Maybe we can actually do something about it. And I want to turn to the election front, and we're going to start here in Indiana, where some interesting news where national and state politics intersect. We've been following this story for a while, and a judge sent back to the Indiana Election Commission a challenge to the candidacy of Alexandra Wilson, a candidate for State Senate District 38 up there in Terre Haute. This fight is politically motivated. The Trump-endorsed Brenda Wilson wants Alexandra Wilson removed to clear the ballot to take on incumbent Senator Greg Good. Good voted against Indiana's congressional redistricting plan in December, so, the knives are out for him. This removal effort hinges on a 2010 resisting law enforcement charge from when Alexandra Wilson was 19 years old. It has since been expunged. Attorney Jim Bopp, a far-right Republican Trump Braun loyalist, is arguing that the expungement is irrelevant because she was still convicted at the time she filed. Now, we learned this week from an NBC News exclusive that the White House was really involved in trying to force Alexandra Wilson off the ballot. Senior White House aides, including Deputy Chief of Staff James Blair and Political Director Matt Brasseau, personally called, texted, and pressured Wilson to drop out, offering her jobs and warning of, quote, ugly attacks if she stayed in. Blair made the calls from a plane to Germany with Marco Rubio, and when Wilson wouldn't budge, Bopp filed to disqualify her the very next morning. The pressure campaign also involved Indiana Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith, Governor Mike Braun's chief of staff, and lobbying group Club for Growth, showing how deep the White House's involvement runs in Indiana's state Senate primaries. It goes further beyond just this race. Trump has now endorsed challengers to 7 of the 8 Republican state senators who voted against redistricting, branding the incumbents as rhino losers, and challengers to real Republicans. Outside money groups, including the aforementioned Club for Growth, as well as Hoosier Leadership for America, that's Jim Banks' PAC, American Leadership PAC. I want to say Turning Point might be involved. They're running TV, radio, and mail ads tied to Trump's endorsements against these targeted incumbents. Trump has also now endorsed all 10 Indiana House Republicans who voted in favor of redistricting and face primary challengers. Now, he is withholding endorsements from 3 House members who haven't voted, who voted against it, but he hasn't endorsed their challengers yet. Marsha, they're really, really invested in Indiana state politics right now.
I'm telling you, only in Indiana do you need a scorecard to track a ballot challenge and a flow chart to explain why nothing is really going to change here. But it's not a quirky local ballot fight anymore. Because when senior White House aides, Beckwith, Club for Growth are calling a first-time candidate to get out of a race, that's not grassroots politics. That's vertical integration, of basically a conspiracy. If you strip away all the surname drama here, this is retaliation politics. Indiana senators, under pressure from constituents, said no to Trump's mid-cycle gerrymandering on steroids plan. And so now primaries are being policed from Washington. It's so ironic to me that the same movement that talks nonstop about local control and states' rights and blah, blah, blah is now micromanaging a Vigo County primary because a handful of state senators wouldn't rubber stamp a power grab. It's so obvious. And just two things on Alexandra Wilson. I'm sitting here again, midlife woman, going, she is a badass and a sycophant all at once. And how do you accomplish that? Because she said publicly, I still support the president. Girl, I think you're in the wrong club.
Seriously. Isaac, I'm interested in just sort of the more meta of this than the specifics of that particular case. Like with Trump, his approval rating is crashing out. It's getting down toward near 30%. He's putting his personal stamp of approval on all of these state House and state Senate candidates. We've got a primary coming up in less than a month here now. Early voting is open. Is the Trump endorsement going to matter in this race the way they think it is, or is this thing a kiss of death?
Ooh, I'd say. Well, first, I'd say from folks in my generation and some friends, and I'm good friends, a lot of folks who are Republican to varying degrees, actually, and we talk about politics, what have you. They know what I do, I know what have you, and using that anecdotal perspective, when it comes to the president and endorsements, what have you, it's just they're just done with Trump generally, or they're done. They're tired. They're still willing to vote Republican. That doesn't necessarily, just because they're done with Trump doesn't necessarily mean they'll vote for a Democrat. Depends on who that Democrat is and what they're hearing and what they're messaging. Goes back into having an affirmative vision, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But you sort of see a fatigue of folks, so making them less likely to go to the polls in general. So in that case, whatever a Trump endorsement would do, I don't know if it's necessarily a kiss of death. I still think it does. I still think it carries, to go to the meta of it, I think it still carries a lot of weight. There was this, now this goes down to Georgia, and this is a congressional race, but during the, wild special election results in Georgia within 10 points of the Republican and Democrat, and Marjorie Taylor Greene's former district. And they, I think it was MSNBC, like Steve Kornacki came, what have you, and they were interviewing voters coming out of the voting booth. And some folks did go, well, I voted for the Republican because he had the president's endorsement. And so for some folks, that's still a huge draw. But I think we're seeing that be less and less. And another point, though, and this also goes down to those incumbent senators who are running their campaigns, and also for Democrats running these seats, because we have 25 out of 25 state Senate seats contested. Shout out my Senator Shelley Yoder here in Bloomington when I go to school there. That when folks are going to the polls here for the primary, what they're thinking, the top thing on their mind, especially with everything going on, is probably not how did my state senator vote on redistricting back in December. It probably is not. Maybe that endorsement might be on their mind, but chances are, particularly with the president not up in 2028, I think it means less than it did back in 2018.
Yeah,
I think it means a lot less than in 2018.
Let's talk about what it means. And you mentioned this special election in Georgia this week. There were actual elections on this past Tuesday, and in Georgia, in the congressional seat vacated by the retired Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican Clay Fuller, as you mentioned, he won that seat, but only by 12 points. This is a district that Trump carried by 37 points in 2024. So, I'm not a mathematician, but that seems like a 25-point swing toward Democrats, the biggest of any House special election in Trump's second term. Democrats have now improved on Trump's 2024 margins in every House special election this term and have flipped a total of 28 total state legislative seats since the beginning of last year. Democrat Sean Harris, the man who lost this particular Georgia race, outperformed despite being outspent 4-1. Fuller, the Republican, and outside groups spent $4 million in this race to Harris's $1.1 million. Now, there were other Georgia races on Tuesday. 3 state legislative special election runoffs were held. 2 in safely Democratic seats stayed blue. 1 deep red Republican seat stayed red. So no flips there. Now, there was also a race in Wisconsin of note where and this is a nonpartisan race, but the liberal Judge Chris Taylor won a seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, expanding the liberals' majority there to 5-2 and locking in liberal control until at least 2030. Conservatives have not won a Wisconsin Supreme Court race since 2019. Liberal judges have now won 4 in a row, including last year's race where the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, spent millions of dollars to influence the outcome and still lost badly. The liberal court there has already used its majority to end a GOP gerrymander, overturn Wisconsin's 176-year-old abortion ban, and lock in school funding increases for the next 400 years. We'll see how that turns out. That's in there, but overall, Marsha, this is encouraging. I remember, I'm old enough, Isaac was just a wee kid at the time, but back in say like 2010, you look at Wisconsin, you look at Scott Walker and how much they consolidated power there. That gerrymander, which kind of put ours to shame, which is saying something. And you kind of thought, how are they ever going to dig themselves out of this? Well, look, they've managed to do that. Does this give you hope that Indiana can dig ourselves out of a similar situation?
Well, I think my message to all Hoosier Democrats who may be low on their hope meter is we have to keep organizing. I mean, you can look at races like the Georgia 14th, where they were outspent 4-1, and that their ground game had to be good to get that close. And I think that's what Indiana Democrats have lost sight of in our rush to the center playbook of the last 25, 30 years. Scott, you and I have talked about this multiple times, but because we moved to Republican light and we had that little bump in the 90s of getting those centrist voters, we are still high on that supply 30 years later. And it's gone. It's not there. It's the emperor has no clothes. So we have to get back to organizing. And it's tough when you're running a county organization that literally had not knocked a door in 15 years. So it's hard to retrain people and get people back on that train of organization. And so my message and my cause for hope is, we are doing that in many spaces. We're getting ramped back up. Again, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. But ultimately, we may not win every race by doing the organizing that we're doing now. But we cannot win any race without doing the organizing.
And just to speak to what you said, the Indiana Democrats kind of running to the center. The first question is always, oh, well, can you raise money? It's not like, what do you actually believe in? Are people going to be inspired by your message? It's can you raise $2 million? Well, that's great, but if you don't stand for anything, people aren't going to come out for you. And I sort of want to turn to you on this, Isaac, because you've hinted at it in some of the earlier in the show. There's also a big Senate race going on with our neighbors to the north in Michigan this cycle, and a lot of news coming out of there this week, where the progressive Senate candidate Abdul El-Sayed has been campaigning alongside progressive Twitch streamer Hassan Piker. Now, This move has been splitting Democrats over how big a tent the party should build. El Sayed is in a three-way primary against Representative Haley Stevens and State Senator Mallory McMorrow. The winner will face former GOP Representative Mike Rogers in November for the seat being vacated by Senator Gary Peters. Now, establishment Democrats and Jewish groups are losing their shit over El Sayed's association with Piker. Piker has said some controversial things during his live streams, as one is wont to do when you're constantly talking for like 8 to 12 hours a day. You might stumble occasionally. He said things like, quote, America deserved 9/11 and that Hamas is 1,000 times better than Israel. Now, McMorrow suggested Piker was analogous to MAGA white nationalist media personality Nick Fuentes. The fault line, of course, is Gaza and Israel. El Sayed and McMorrow both are on record as calling it a genocide. El Sayed wants to end military aid entirely, while Haley Stevens is all the way on the other end. She calls herself a proud pro-Israel Democrat. Now, Piker, who has 3.1 million Twitch followers and has hosted AOC and New York Mayor Zoran Mamdani, argues that the backlash is really about suppressing a younger, more populist wing of the party rather than about him personally. Things that Piker points out rub establishment folks the wrong way, and in a self-own, I would say, by the establishment, the DNC this week rejected a resolution condemning the influence of the pro-Israel lobbying group AIPAC. And I should mention, AIPAC isn't just any pro-Israel lobbying group. It is the far-right pro-Israel lobbying group. There are more liberal pro-Israel organizations out there. We could debate on how much credence you give to them, but AIPAC is kind of a different beast, and they have spent $221 million in Democratic races since 2022, including $22 million in this cycle in Illinois a few weeks ago alone. Two further resolutions recognizing a Palestinian state and conditioning military aid to Israel were punted to a Middle East working group that critics say exists mainly to avoid difficult decisions. DNC Chair Ken Martin defended the outcome by pointing to a separate blanket anti-dark money resolution without naming AIPAC specifically. Polling has consistently shown that the Democratic base has shifted sharply away from Israel since the Gaza genocide, making the establishment's posture increasingly at odds with its own voters. So, Isaac, you are right there in the demographic to whom Hassan Piker speaks. What do you make of this?
What I make of it is that the Democratic establishment is very quick to snatch victory from what's the saying? Snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. That sort of idea. I look, those statements by themselves. From what I've at least briefly read up, that when they've taken out of context, what have you, and also more context behind it, and but then that gets into the whole actually But I think it speaks to a real frustration that is. That talk about the more populist wing of the party, and that is also just young people, folks who, I heard this from a friend of mine, my predecessor as president of College Dems, Anushka Pandey. She once said speaking in Salem, Indiana, that our generation, we've never seen a time. So I was born in 2004, and so I grew up vaguely aware of who Obama was, what have you. And then 2016 was when I really started paying attention, like politics. Oh, this is what politics is, or it's being aware. So we haven't really known a time of actual stability, or been being cognizantly aware of this is stability. That's not in childhood. We haven't known that time, and we desperately want to know that time. And all this stuff with the party trying to shut down Hassan Piker. And the party trying to shut down folks like Abu al-Said, who has a real following, who is in a number of ways already you could argue, he's at a disadvantage. His last name is al-Said. He's not going to win in a swing state like Michigan, yet he's competitive. He's punching above his, and that should speak to his message. That should speak to what he's able to bring to the party. And then you take the DNC down in New Orleans this past week. And I have to shout out our College Democrats of America president and vice president, particularly our vice president. He very, Cameron Landon, very just calling them out at a meeting like, hey, we need to take a stand on this. And of course, the DNC didn't listen. I think the DNC is the establishment, so, is being too quick to snatch what could be a winning issue, and not just take public opinion and go along with it, but take public opinion and sort of lead it in a direction that is more in line with the values of our party of, respecting folks' like inherent dignity and, respecting like the nuances of things, what have you. And we're really giving up a great opportunity to take the lead on public opinion and yielding it to those actors on the far right and in other spaces that would use that public opinion for evil. And still, if I may be so bold. So I make all that to say I'm just disappointed and in part not surprised, but am very encouraged by Abdul al-Said's campaign and just like not backing down that idea. Like we're right here to stay. We're gonna keep fighting.
I'm definitely keeping an eye on this one. Number one, these are our neighbors up there in Michigan.
Yeah.
I'm from that part of the state where, Michigan's just right up across the line. And it's certainly a very good indication of where things are headed. If you do submit the narrative to the far right, you wind up with a situation like Hungary. They are having elections today, actually. So is Peru, by the way. Peru's holding an election. They've got 35 presidential candidates. No one's polling above 15%. A runoff there on June 7th is almost certain, with right-wing Keiko Fujimori holding a narrow lead. She is the daughter of former President Alberto Fujimori, who served 16 years in prison for human rights abuses before dying in 2024, and has herself faced corruption charges down in Peru there. But Hungary is a particularly useful example because that is very much the playbook that our far right is using. That is the they're like the model for MAGA over there in Hungary under Viktor Orban. And wouldn't you know, Vice President J.D. Vance was over there this week boosting Orban ahead of today's elections. He was in Budapest, I want to say Wednesday, to boost the strongman whose 16-year grip on power is being challenged perhaps more strongly this year than at any time over the past decade and a half, with challenger Peter Magyar channeling voter anger over corruption and a struggling economy. Now, strange bedfellows, the U.S. and Russia are both intervening to keep Orban in power, while the European Union and Ukraine want him gone. Hungary's foreign minister was caught on leaked audio recently telling Russia's foreign minister, quote, "I am always at your disposal." Like we said, Orban has been there for 16 years, and in that time, he has reshaped Hungary's courts, media, and electoral maps to entrench his power, what the European Parliament calls electoral autocracy, and he has never lost under the system he has built. Marsha, I don't know if you've been paying attention to this, but a little bit. Do you think by the end of the day, we'll know if the Orban era is over?
I mean, fingers crossed. Obviously, for the EU, this is a referendum on illiberal democracy itself, and putting the lid on that once and for all. And if Orban falls, it definitely reshapes Europe's internal balance, weakens the far right playbook globally. But if he survives, it basically confirms for the rest of us, not far right, Republican normies onto the left, how hard it is to vote your way out of a captured system. So even with organization and high turnout. So we need to be watching. We definitely need to be watching and seeing the potential consequences here.
we spoke of Trump's endorsement and whether it was a kiss of death here in Indiana. Orban's got J.D. Vance's endorsement over there. I don't know if that is, got the sway that they think it does. I want to move on and talk about our next story and some weird stuff this week. Now, the Jeffrey Epstein story has sort of disappeared into the background with this whole, war going on and whatnot. But of all people, the First Lady, Melania Trump, resurrected this thing with an unusual White House event on Thursday. Melania made an extraordinary statement denying her ties to Jeffrey Epstein, but her decision to revive the issue almost certainly pushes it back into the spotlight after the war had largely buried it. Now, she acknowledged being in overlapping social circles with Epstein and his partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, but called a 2002 email to Maxwell a trivial, casual correspondence without elaborating on its content. She called Ghislaine Sweet Pea. You don't call people with who you are not personal close friends Sweet Pea. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Anyway, the West Wing knew she was going to make a statement, but apparently didn't know what she was going to say, and the White House press office did not respond to requests for comment. Melania called for congressional hearings for Epstein survivors, and Democrats, of course, immediately agreed. Republicans, however, were split. Thomas Massie of Kentucky turned attention back to the Justice Department, saying it's the Attorney General's job to bring in survivors for testimony. Massie, of course, who has pressed for more arrests in the Epstein case, has worked with Ro Khanna across the aisle to deliver the Epstein Files Transparency Act, ended a social media post with a call to, quote, prosecute in all caps. Melania's statement came months after HarperCollins UK apologized and retracted passages from a book suggesting Epstein introduced her to Trump, the most recent of several retractions she cited. Well, you know who did introduce Melania to Donald Trump? It was a guy named Paolo Zampoli. And wouldn't you know that Paolo Zampoli was right there next to J.D. Vance in Hungary this week. This guy, Zampoli, is Trump's special envoy for global partnerships and the man who, like we said, introduced Donald and Melania and has such a delightfully Italian name that you have to do the chef's kiss gesture every time you say it. Paolo Zampoli. Anyway, he appears multiple times in the Epstein documents. He discussed buying a modeling agency with Epstein and was named a partner in Ghislaine Maxwell's open charity. Zampoli's ex-girlfriend, Brazilian model Amanda Ungaro, rode Epstein's Lolita Express at age 17. That's how she was delivered to the United States into the waiting arms of Zampoli. She is now threatening to expose everything, accusing the father of her child, Zampoli, of using his Washington connections to have her arrested by ICE amid a custody dispute. Isaac, certainly seems like Melania might be trying to get out in front of this story.
And it seems like, and folks in the White House might agree if they're not talking, if the First Lady's office and the White House aren't talking to each other. But I would say it's just, it might very well be that the First Lady's trying to get out ahead of it. I'm just, all this stuff with Epstein, what have you, it's like all new things, especially even though the new spotlight has slowly drifted away and now is suddenly back up on Epstein. Just all these new things. The only thing I'm surprised about is just how further the depravity goes. And I guess what I'll say with the First Lady's statement, I'm at least tangentially thankful, a little bit thankful that she went, oh, yes, there should be congressional hearings. And then thankful for Democrats actually snatching that and going, hey, and using that as a bludgeoning to tool.
You should testify.
Great idea. You should. Yeah, there you go. It's like, hey, you should put your money where your mouth is, Mr. Trump. So, and I guess it is interesting. The timing is interesting, particularly with everything going on and the White House desperately not wanting to talk about surprise. And you think they don't want to talk about a war, everything like that. But it's curious, they really don't want to talk about Epstein. Wonder what. And particularly with especially when the Attorney General, well, That's a whole other thing. Pam Bondi being fired, not really because of, covering up Epstein stuff, but because she wasn't doing a good enough job prosecuting the president's opponents, which that's what have you. And so I'll be the only thing I can think of is just a wait and see what comes of it. I don't know if, especially with this Congress, I don't know if anything will come of it, but it's going to be up to Democrats once, knocking on wood here, get the majority in both the House and hopefully the Senate, that we can actually use that as a bludgeoning to have some oversight, and actually then use that for the contrast for an affirmative vision of, hey, all these pedophiles, we actually want to give you health care. We actually want to do good things for you. And so all that is to say, it is interesting. It is interesting, the First Lady's decision just to make a statement.
Certainly. Now, Marsha, so, Isaac mentioned Pam Bondi, and let's talk briefly about the DOJ and the organization. She, until recently, headed the primary investigative arm under the DOJ, of course, is the FBI. And we found out this week that released handwritten notes from a 2019 FBI interview corroborate witnesses to a South Carolina woman's allegation that Epstein trafficked her as a teen and that she was forced into a sex act involving Donald Trump. Key details in this handwritten note were they never made it into the official FBI summaries released by DOJ, and the FBI never appears to have contacted at least one of the witnesses named in those notes. Great investigative report there from the Charleston Post and Courier. Now, Pam Bondi, who was just ousted as AG, is still subpoenaed to testify on April 14th about the DOJ's handling of the Epstein files. But she's refusing to comply with the subpoena, claiming she was subpoenaed as Attorney General. And since she no longer holds that office, that's not for her. So Democrats, of course, are threatening contempt. The subpoena passed on a bipartisan basis, with multiple Republicans joining every Democrat. South Carolina Republican Nancy Mace saying Bondi, quote, will still have to appear. Epstein survivors Maria and Annie Farmer are demanding Bondi testify under oath, saying the DOJ's handling of the files betray the trust of survivors. Now, Bondi may not wind up testifying, but you know who will? Bill Gates. He's going to appear before the House Oversight Committee in June. He appears thousands of times in the Epstein files, met with Epstein repeatedly after his initial 2008 conviction of sex crimes against a minor, and flew on his private plane multiple times. The Epstein files contain claims that Epstein helped Gates obtain medication for a sexually transmitted infection from, quote, sex with Russian girls, and that Gates wanted to secretly give that medication to his then wife, Melinda, who told NPR the revelations filled her with unbelievable sadness. Also scheduled to testify are Commerce Secretary Howard, gets me every time, Lutnick on May 6th, and a prison guard on duty the night Epstein died on May 18th, while Maxwell Ghislaine, of course, Epstein's partner, is refusing to testify without immunity or clemency. Marsha, I don't know. Where are we on this thing? I ask everybody I talk to on this. Are these victims, are these survivors ever going to see justice?
Obviously, that's the heartbreaking part of all of this. And every single time this comes back into the news, from whatever angle, the anguish and the trauma is revisited in these women. So yes, that pulls at my heartstrings. On the procedural side of things, I always draw parallels in my mind to Watergate. I mean, I was sentient during Watergate. I was 10 years old when President Nixon resigned. So I'm always in my mind kind of drawing parallels to things. Bill Gates agreeing to testify is a reminder that this investigation is moving from rumor sorting to timeline building. And I'll also harken back to Zampoli. He's like this Rolodex that nobody threw out, right? He may not be, it's the connective tissue. He's the hinge to so many relationships. But what sorts all of this out? I mean, definitely, congressional hearings and everything, but we still have to have journalists. We still have to have journalists who are teasing out all of these details. You think about that shoe leather work of Woodward and Bernstein and others, revolving around Watergate, that's what teases out all of the details. So, we have to hope that the free press is not dead and still working. And I think it is in independent spaces, if not at, the Gray Lady and the Washington Post and all of those places. Pam Bondi, I think about her and I'm like, girl, Richard Nixon didn't go to prison, but John Mitchell did. So you better be lawyered up and good, but I don't think you're going to get out of this unscathed. There's a growing impatience, not only with the people, but with Congress in using process as a shield. And I agree with Isaac. They will get to it.
I hope so. I hope we actually get the truth out of this thing at some point. And just to second what you said about the great journalism work, like we mentioned, the Charleston Post and Courier's doing a really good job covering the sort of South Carolina angle to this. And I want to also shout out Julie K. Brown at the Miami Herald, who has been probably the person most on top of the Epstein case. I want to turn from Pam Bondi, the disgraced former Attorney General of the United States, to the disgrace of an Attorney General that we have in here in Indiana, and talk about Todd Rokita briefly as we turn the page to ICE and immigration. My sheriff, Monroe County Sheriff Ruben Marte, has sued Attorney General Rokita over Indiana's new ICE compliance law, that's Senate Enrolled Act 76, arguing it requires detaining people without a judicial warrant, a violation of the Fourth Amendment rights Marte swore to protect. The sheriff says complying with the law would expose Monroe County to significant civil liability, and notes his office already honors ICE detainer requests when accompanied by a judicial warrant. Rokita has an ongoing lawsuit against Marte and I believe the St. Joseph County Sheriff as well over the county's immigration detention policy. This new suit is Marte firing back. Now, I want to stay on ICE and sort of the Indiana angle of it all, where this week Congressman Andre Carson, who we mentioned at the top of the show, he toured the Miami Correctional Facility and met privately with detainees that ICE is holding there, just days after a second detainee death at the facility in less than 2 months. Carson says detainees told him at least one death may have been preventable. The person was screaming with no functioning intercom system, and personnel failed to respond rapidly. Detainees there described 2-week waits for medical care, resulting in a few Tylenol capsules, breakfast served at 3:30 a.m., court documents arriving after filing deadlines had already passed, and as well as religious discrimination. The Indiana Department of Corrections has received $5 million thus far under its ICE detention contract. Carson is calling for an end to ICE detention at the facility entirely, saying the dual-use model is, quote, simply unsustainable. Isaac, I don't know which one you want to tackle there first, Rokita or Carson. I'll actually, listen, you're an IU student. You're up here in Monroe County with me. Why don't you speak about Sheriff Marte and his lawsuit against Rokita?
Yes, I can speak to. Well, actually, I want to jump back to that 5 million number and just in part how we know it's 5 million, and just shouting out the good work that Indiana House Democrats are doing. The only reason we know that, and this is from the Miami Correctional Facility, correctional facilities, because of an amendment made by Representative Greg Porter to SB 76, the horrible, no good, very bad, that immigration law to just try and supercharge our current reckless policies, and to say, all right, if we're gonna have an agreement with the Miami Correctional Facility with the 287G agreement, we have to know how much we're spending and how much are we receiving. And undoubtedly, especially in our, not just the correctional facility, but also in jails like here in Monroe County, or I'm not in Monroe County right now, but in Monroe County, particularly with all that, the whole debate over the new jail and how do you like the cost of housing and taking care of folks in the care of these at the jails, undoubtedly, and then plus not even to mention the legal costs, what have you, when processes are not followed. It dwarfs whatever the federal government paltry amount the federal government would give us, and even then, it's just like even then it's blood money, what have you. And so going to Monroe County, I think the sheriff is, I will say I haven't read enough to speak super confidently about it, but all I know is there's been a lot of debate with the jail already, with the jail being too small. We need to build a new one. Where do we build a new one? Should we build a new one? And all because of a lawsuit from the ACLU says, hey, our current jail it's just not fit. And I think Sheriff Marte is, well, one, I applaud Sheriff Marte for going toe-to-toe with Todd Rokita in the state of Indiana. Because this really does put, again, going back to what Marsha was saying earlier, a party that prides itself on local control, on states' rights, on government that governs closest to home, governs best, is really intent on making sure local government at least does not have the tools it needs to actually serve people. And it's funny how that happens. And I think and it's not just a isolated thing to both St. Joseph County and Monroe County. I know out in I think it's Austin County, Sheriff Jerry Gooden, he has also spoken out against any sort of at least legislation requiring sheriffs to host ICE detainees in their jail without sort of that process, because it's not cheap. And then also you take into account, it's not cheap no matter which way you look, no matter how you look at it. And we'll see what comes of it. I guess that's the main thing I could say. We'll see what comes of it. If the lawsuit changes the law or strikes down elements of it, or makes some progress in terms of trying to give folks, just give folks dignity, and also, maintaining local control over what happens in counties, but also giving folks dignity if we are going to host folks. And so, I applaud Sheriff Marte, and I'll be very interested to see how that continues to develop.
A lot you could tug on there. It's the Rokita and the state wants the localities, the sheriffs, the counties to do the federal government's job for them, while, if you recall, just last year, we passed this quote unquote property tax reform, which took a lot of money away from counties and localities. So now they got to do more with less, and they got to do now even more with less. Marsha, I'm going to come back to you here in just a second. I want to look at some more ICE stories as we zoom out away from Indiana and back to the national level. And I want to look at the ICE facility in Texas, which makes the Miami Correctional facility here look like a walk in the park. Democrats there are saying that this notorious Dilley detention center is operating in a, quote, new era of secrecy under the new DHS chief, Markwayne Mullin. Lawmakers who visited the facility in Texas say staff greeted them with scripted propaganda from DHS leadership and refused to answer questions, directing all inquiries in writing to Washington. More than 300 people, including 77 children, are currently detained at Dilley, part of roughly 6,200 children placed in ICE detention since Trump's second term began. Emergency crews have been dispatched there nearly a dozen times in 6 months for children with seizures, broken bones, respiratory distress, and plunging oxygen levels. A 5-year-old there has had untreated cavities for months, receiving nothing more than ibuprofen. Congressman Joaquin Castro says the facility has grown more secretive, not less, under new DHS Secretary Mullin. Quote, there are people there with grave medical conditions that are worsening because they're not treated as fully human. Well, listen, that's all terrible. But at least they didn't shoot these people. ICE shot another guy in California this week. A California man shot by ICE agents during a traffic stop says officers fired on him as he was trying to reverse away from them. He was hit by more than 6 bullets, including one to the face, and has undergone 3 surgeries. ICE claimed he's a member of the 18th Street El Salvadoran street gang, but provided no evidence. Excuse me. And Hernandez The man who was shot by ICE was acquitted of that murder charge in 2019. His attorney says he has never been in a gang. This follows a pattern. ICE shot Renee Good in Minneapolis in January, claiming she ran over an officer, but footage showed otherwise. And in Oregon, DHS called a shooting victim a gang member when she was actually a prior victim of an assault. Along the lines, back to Minnesota, the authorities in Minneapolis there released a video of another ICE shooting that directly contradicts federal agents' sworn accounts. The DOJ dropped charges against the two men arrested and opened a criminal probe into the ICE officers for making untruthful statements under oath. The U.S. Attorney's Office there opened a criminal probe into these officers after video evidence revealed their sworn testimony included untruthful statements. Lying under oath is a serious federal offense, an assistant secretary acknowledged. So, Marsha, this is another one of those things that I feel like we've kind of lost track of with the war going on. ICE is still out there. They're still shooting people. They're still mistreating people in prisons. They're still a scourge on American life and our reputation and all things holy.
We talked about it in the beginning about a pattern, right? About pattern of language from the Trump administration. So when you zoom out on all of this, this is not a series of isolated shootings. It is a pattern of behavior that leads to dead people. So when we're making high-risk traffic stops based on thin or absolutely faulty intelligence, then people die. The other thing is, once that gang label is applied, it pre-authorizes an escalation, right? Flight becomes aggression, panic becomes threat. And when the intelligence is wrong, there's the correction either comes way too late or not at all after someone's already been shot. Okay. We're clearly dealing with people who don't have enough training, who aren't de-escalating situations, who are shooting first and asking questions later. And, again, we talk all the time about young people and lots of people just losing faith in government institutions. And this institution is irrevocably broken. It's something that's going to need to be rebuilt from the ground up.
So I guess before we turn the page on ICE here, a couple things I wanted to put on the record. I don't know if we're going to get a chance to talk about them because there are some things I want to make sure we spend some more time on here before we got to wrap up. We mentioned the ICE's only options are all bad. The things that they're here for are detentions, shootings, and deportations, apparently. Now, this week, the wife of a U.S. soldier was freed from ICE detention, even as they're continuing to attempt to deport her. This is down in Louisiana, where ICE detained a soldier's wife on a military base while the couple was there to register her as a military spouse. She has been in the U.S. since she was 20 months old, brought here as a toddler. The Sergeant Matthew Blank, that's the soldier in question, said he never imagined doing the right thing, registering his wife as a military spouse for military benefits would result in her being taken away. They've slapped a GPS bracelet on her and says that they're going to continue to try to deport her. All she's ever wanted is to live with dignity in the country she has called home since she was a baby. The Trump administration is also reaffirming plans to deport Kilmar Abrego Garcia. We've been on the story of this man for almost a year now. They're insisting on deporting him to Liberia, a country in Africa, not his native El Salvador, where we don't want to deport him because he fled there fearing for his life, or to Costa Rica, which has offered to take him, and he said, well, if you gotta deport me, I guess I'll go there. Garcia was wrongly deported to El Salvador in March 2025 in violation of a protection order, imprisoned at the notorious CCOT facility there, and only returned to the U.S. in June after a unanimous Supreme Court ruling. Since his return, the administration has continued to persecute him, filing trumped-up smuggling charges against him, detaining him again after he was released, and proposed sending him to Uganda before settling on Liberia. This is a pattern that keeps coming up. The U.S. is now just sending people willy-nilly to Africa who have no ties to the continent whatsoever. This week, the Democratic Republic of Congo announced it will also receive third country deportees from the U.S. under a new deal. And just the last kind of Indiana angle on these deportations, a IU postdoctoral researcher here was deported after pleading guilty to smuggling E. coli DNA into the U.S. from China. This former researcher was sentenced to 4 months in prison and deported after pleading guilty to smuggling the bacteria, mislabeled in a shipping manifest as women's underwear. The FBI caught him at O'Hare after he returned from a research trip in the UK. He initially denied this before admitting he mislabeled the package to circumvent U.S. law. Apparently, the FBI also presented evidence that Xiang, the professor, or the researcher, was a Chinese Communist Party member who lied about his party ties during his immigration interview. Now, I'd love to talk about the immigration stuff a little bit more, but alas, we have to move on and talk about, with our last about 15 minutes here, other Indiana news. And I've got a grab bag of good stuff here. Staying, I guess we'll start with the courts in the case where big story this week. 2 Indiana sheriffs were charged in a public integrity investigation by the Indiana State Police. And this is from WTHR. The 2 sheriffs and a jail matron face criminal charges in Indiana State Police public integrity investigations announced Thursday by Marion County Prosecutor Ryan Mears. Du Bois County Sheriff Thomas Kleinhelter is charged with false informing and official misconduct after allegedly using $78,000 in jail commissary funds for golf rounds, airline tickets to Dubai, Blackstone grills, and gift cards, and then lying to investigators about it. And Clinton County Sheriff Richard Kelly and his wife, jail matron Ashley Kelly, are charged with fraud, theft, and official misconduct after allegedly misappropriating Indiana State Police pension funds and commissary money. Courts have already found them personally liable for more than $329,000 in misappropriated funds. Ashley Kelly allegedly collected at least $50,000 in disability payments while engaging in strenuous physical activities that contradict her claimed medical limitations. Her husband, the sheriff, created this jail matron job for her before taking office. Clinton County commissioners are calling for both Kellys to resign immediately, saying public trust has been broken. This follows a 2025 court ruling that already found them personally liable for the misappropriation. Marsha, the Du Bois County Sheriff, at least, that one's right down there in your neck of the woods.
It sure is. Clearly, well, I don't know a lot about it, but it's clearly a case of trying to keep up with the Brauns, I guess. I don't know, flights to Dubai. I don't know. But it's the Clinton County one that really kind of grabs my attention almost a little bit more. Am I understanding the story right, that neither one of them have resigned from their jobs? I mean, clearly, we are living in a post-shame society when we must be convicted of wrongdoing before we will leave public office. We had a similar situation happen in Knox County a couple of years ago with the Republican elected coroner who was stealing drugs out of the medicine cabinets of dead people. Who she was charged and was, the case was working its way through the court system, and she refused to resign. And then ultimately she took a plea agreement and did go to prison, but never resigned. But kids, let this be a lesson to you at home. 2 sheriffs, 2 scandals, 1 reminder: law and order starts at home.
And listen, these guys, this is child's play compared to what Clark County Sheriff Jamie Knoll got up to a few years ago. It seems, and listen, we happen to know that pretty damn well every county sheriff in Indiana is a Republican, except for a handful, like Sheriff Marte, my sheriff here in Monroe County. Isaac, that does not speak well to Indiana Republican Party as a whole, or, law enforcement. If this seems to be a recurring pattern with our county sheriffs, you wonder if there are more where this came from.
Oh, well, I guess among some people, being a county sheriff in Indiana is a good gig. But all that is to say, it does make you wonder. It does make you wonder and question the confidence that, especially a lot of rural counties in Indiana, the sheriff is the sheriff's department is one of the most primary law enforcement agencies in a county. And so it does make you question a lot. Just an interesting note when it comes to, I forget the exact provision of it when Marsha was talking about the Knox County coroner. The county position responsible for arresting the sheriff or as they're being moved from office that's given that authority is the county coroner in Indiana. And so that's just interesting. Obviously, yes, both of these cases they have not been to that same extent as Jamie Knoll, although Du Bois County sounds like it was getting, if they'd given a couple more years, it would have gotten there. But I very much applaud Prosecutor Mears up in Indianapolis for taking these charges on. And that also says another thing, that it's him and not those within those counties that are. Now, granted, there's like legal things on that. I think
this is precisely because it was filed by the state police and they filed these things in Marion County Court.
That's right. But it does say, and so I suppose that doesn't even preclude those folks in those counties, which are probably Republican, I'd imagine, and Du Bois and Clinton, from also saying, hey, what's going on here? And so it does make you wonder. And exactly what needs to be done from the state legislature to obviously some reforms or something need to happen, but I would bet good money on Kalshi or what have you that we'll have another sheriff arrested by the end of the year.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe you can get good odds on whether or not another Indiana sheriff will be arrested for the end of the year. I wouldn't bet against it. I'll tell you that. So, another interesting development in Indiana courts this week: a former Ball State employee who had been fired for a private Facebook post about Charlie Kirk's death has settled her lawsuit against the university. Terms are sealed, but Ball State called it, quote, successful. Suzanne Sheverts lost her job after Attorney General Todd Rokita, there's this clown again, publicly amplified her private post. The ACLU noted it was Rokita, not Sheverts, who caused the disruption by disseminating it. Rokita was not named in the lawsuit, but Sheverts did not seek her job back, saying she could no longer work at Ball State safely. Now, one more court case, not in Indiana. This was filed in Illinois, but it does matter to Hoosiers, I believe. John Deere and Company agreed to pay $99 million to settle a right to repair lawsuit, resolving a class action suit accusing the company of monopolizing repair services by withholding software and conspiring with dealers to force farmers to use authorized repair shops at inflated prices. The settlement covers farmers who paid Deere or authorized dealers for large agricultural equipment repairs between January 2018 and the deal's approval date. It requires Deere to strengthen access to repair resources going forward. They still face a separate Federal Trade Commission lawsuit from the Biden era, which surprisingly the Trump people haven't dropped yet, making similar accusations, and they continue to deny wrongdoing in the case. Marsha, I don't know if you want to comment on either one of those. You take your pick.
I'm going to take the free speech one, being the journalism girl over here. Ball State says that the post caused disruption. As you mentioned, Rokita basically amplified the disruption. Everything that guy touches, I swear. But then Ball State comes back and quietly settles this lawsuit. And that's usually what happens when disruption turns out to be protected speech. So universities maybe need to start learning their lesson here, that you don't fix a PR panic by firing the First Amendment.
Yeah, 100%. So I guess, boy, time's coming up. I want to spend some good time on this. So let's move on. Now.
Yeah, well, I do want to. Can I touch on John Deere and right to repair for a moment?
Please,
here, Scott?
Please.
I want to touch on that. Yes. So actually, it's funny. So I'm a member of the Indiana Farm Bureau. And back in, I believe this was 2024, I think it had been 2024, I was honored and to be an alternate delegate to the Indiana Farm Bureau's policy recommendation convention. This whole handbook that they send to their lobbyists in Indianapolis to parse through, and they have a whole bunch of delegates. It was a long day that go through and debate. Oh, this should be in, this shouldn't be into et cetera. And I had brought up. I bring this up just because. I brought up how Indiana Farm Bureau and American Farm Bureau has had a memorandum of understanding with John Deere and these companies to allow their members to have access to the basically right to repair, and in exchange, Farm Bureau would not advocate for right to repair, federal and state. And I think, and then obviously, and even at that time, it was like, well, how much is being abided by this memorandum of understanding is very loose. And so I pushed for, and among other folks who were there at that policy recommendation convention, several counties for a right to repair. And it was like a provision that it's like, if the memorandum of understanding drops, then Indiana Farm Bureau fights for right to repair. And obviously that got voted down because, in my opinion, and there are good people in county farm bureaus across the state. I just think statewide and nationally, American Farm Bureau is kind of too beholden to big ag agriculture and John Deere. And so when I saw this, seeing that in the show notes on, it's just like, I knew it. I knew it. And it's like, And so more needs to be done in terms of, I think Democrats, especially in Indiana, across the country, need to really take right to repair by, and organizations that are supposed to be responsible for advocating for farmers and agriculture need to take it by the horns, because this is an issue that is very important to Hoosiers and very important to American farmers. I mean, right to repair generally beyond agriculture is important, but especially in agriculture. And so I bring that up to say, if there are some pockets here in Indiana, particularly in county farm bureaus, where that was, I didn't say this. So each county had, we got 10 minutes. Okay, I'll be real quick on this because this is just another point. Each county had like three policies that they wanted to push for the convention. Like my county, I was representing Perry County, was it was like childcare, and then tax revenue because the national forest takes up Perry County. In some counties, it was the top thing was right to repair, in like 4 or 5 counties, if not more. It was like on that list. And so it's like, that's interesting. And so I haven't looked at that. It's been a year or two now since I've been able to look at those things, but I wonder how it's something to think about. I think it's something that folks running for office here in Indiana need to be looking at. And that's another thing also. And so the resolution failed, and one of the people who came up to me who spoke out against that, we're talking, and I go, so let me ask this. Are you in favor of a federal or statewide right to repair? It's just, I'm in favor of federal. It just needs to be national. Doing statewide just creates this weird patchwork. Just like, okay. And so that's also something for folks running for Congress need to think about, in my opinion.
Now do abortion.
So listen, the whole thing with the right to repair is monopoly power being used to extract extra from people where there's no competition. What are you going to do? You got to go through Deere, right? Well, let's talk about another industry that bending Hoosiers over and taking whatever they want. That's your utilities. Now, Governor Braun this week celebrated quote unquote landmark utility legislation, ceremonially signing House Enrolled Act 1002, which has been law for a couple weeks now at least. This prohibits hot weather shutoffs for low-income customers, requires utility assistance programs for low-income households, moves all residential customers to budget billing by default. Braun has also appointed a new utility consumer counselor and 3 new, quote, rate-conscious IURC commissioners, but consumer advocates were notably not invited to the signing ceremony. And, the tension is hard to ignore because Braun is touting that he's saving Hoosiers money on their utility bills on one hand, while on the other hand, the state is approving these massive power-hungry data centers that are driving up folks' utility bills. In Shelbyville, the Common Council there voted to approve annexation, rezoning, and an economic development agreement for a potential $2 billion 11-building data center campus on 429 acres near State Road 44. The developer, Prologis, faced repeated delays due to public opposition over unanswered questions about water use, environmental impact, and effects on Shelby County's agricultural character. And look, it's not just out in the agricultural areas where folks don't want data centers. In Indianapolis, in the Martindale-Brightwood neighborhood, where they've been trying to fight off a Metro Blocks data center, Indianapolis City County Councilor Ron Gibson, who has been in support of this center, his home was apparently shot at 13 times, and a no data centers note was left on his doorstep. This is just days after he supported the rezoning for the data center over constituent opposition. Now, Gibson didn't call Indianapolis Metro PD until roughly 8:30 a.m., nearly 8 hours after he says the shooting occurred, a detail that has fueled local skepticism about the incidents. Neighborhood opposition group Protect Martindale-Brightwood condemned the violence, but locals are questioning the incident's authenticity, given the conveniently on-message note and the suspicious reporting delay. Gibson is standing by his support for the data center after this shooting. Now, Marsha, we should obviously say we condemn political violence and we should not be shooting up people's houses if we disagree with things they support. But everybody I'm seeing up there in that community is like, man, this thing smells fishy.
No comment. I mean, clearly, I agree with you. Violence, you can protest, vote, organize, but anytime a disagreement turns into violence, the argument collapses. But without more information, I'm not going to go on the record on that.
Isaac, any thoughts before we gotta take this thing home?
I think there's this real. Going back to the utility issue. There's an Indiana Week in Review where Shelley Yoder, talked about how it doesn't go far enough. It's something, sure, but it just doesn't go far enough. So that's what I'll say about the utility issue and reform and what have you. And then as for with data centers, what have you, that could be a whole podcast in of itself. I think that there's this frustration that needs to be addressed by our leaders. And I think especially in some of these communities, if Republicans aren't going to do it, then Indiana Democrats need to take a stand and say, either we don't want data centers or that, hey, listen, how we have it set up right now is just not tenable. It just gives way too much power to these big companies to build these big giant data centers for pennies on the dollar back to the state, just because of how our laws are written when it comes to sales tax relief for big data centers, what have you. And so I've so far been very disappointed by Indiana Democrats with respect to really pushing that data center angle, but we'll see what happens here. It's early on, and the primaries aren't over yet. But that's what I'll be very eager to see here in the fall.
Yeah, no one wants to stand in the way of progress, but I think we want to make sure that that consumers have protections, that the environment has protections. There are ways to build these things in sustainable ways. The rest of the world is figuring it out, and we are giving away the farm literally in many cases. So last thing this week. I wanted to mention, unfortunately, we don't get to talk about the media consolidation in Indianapolis. Over 50 people were laid off at WRTV after they were acquired by Circle City Broadcasting, who now owns like half the media outlets in Indianapolis. That's a concerning thing. We'll keep an eye on that. But finally this week, The Artemis II crew splashdown April 10th off San Diego, successfully returning 4 astronauts from the first crewed lunar mission since Apollo 17 in 1972. Victor Glover became the first person of color to leave Earth orbit, Christina Koch the first woman, and Jeremy Hansen, a Canadian, the first non-American. The crew broke Apollo 13's 56-year-old distance record, flying more than 252,000 miles from the Earth, and witnessed a 54-minute total solar eclipse from lunar distance that was invisible from Earth. NASA had to tweak the re-entry angle after cracks appeared in the heat shield during the uncrewed Artemis I mission. The fix worked. Artemis II was a shakeout mission. The real goal apparently is Artemis IV, which aims to land astronauts near the lunar South Pole in late 2028, ahead of China's own crewed lunar landing target of 2030. 30 seconds each. Does this fill you with American pride in our ingenuity that we're like finally doing big space exploration again, Marsha?
Well, again, I was a child during Apollo. I was alive for the moon landing, although I very, very vaguely remember it. But unlike the Cold War space race, I feel like Artemis is cooperative and not competitive. It's about staying, not just visiting. It's about building a long-term presence through science and shared purpose. And in a moment,
presidents, please. We've got
right. Yeah. Not presidents. Yeah. In a moment, though, where we've talked this whole episode about institutions feeling shaky, Artemis does give me hope, because it proves we can still plan far ahead. We can work together. We can do hard things and do them with purpose.
Very good. Isaac, how's it feel? You were not around for the Apollo missions.
No, I wasn't.
Does this fill you with pride or inspiration?
I haven't had a chance to really follow along with it this past week. It's been so busy, but I'm very much looking forward to reading up more about, especially one thing is the pictures coming from, these new pictures coming from it. It's just very excited for when we go back to the moon in 2028. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, that'll be cool stuff. Let's provided we're all still alive in 2028 and Trump hasn't nuked something between now and then. Listen, it's been a pleasure to have both of you here. Why don't you tell folks where they can find you online if they want to hear more about you? Marsha, where can folks find the podcast?
Find Left of Midlife wherever you find your podcasts. Our home is Podbean, but you can pick it up anywhere, Spotify, Apple, all the places. You can check out the work we're doing in Knox County at Knox County, Indiana Democratic Party on Facebook, because that's where all the old people are. And we have enough young people following us there that's our preferred social media channel of choice.
All right. Well, Isaac, sounds like the folks aren't going to find you on Facebook. So where are they going to find you?
You're gonna find me on Instagram at Isaac all lowercase.cw, and you're also going to find the College Democrats at IU at Democrats at IU on Instagram. Stay tuned for Facebook, and then you'll also find College Democrats in Indiana on Instagram and Facebook. And stay tuned for a lot of great work. Great work.
All right. Well, excellent. Again, thank you so much both for being here. It's been a pleasure and an honor. Folks can find me tonight back here on these very channels hosting a virtual town hall with 5th District Congressional candidate Jackson Franklin. A lot more coming up here on Progressive Indiana Network this week. A theme where we focus on the 4th Congressional District. We hosted a debate for that race yesterday. Derek Holder of Hold 'em Accountable has 3 interviews with those candidates this week. Monday, Joe Mackey. Wednesday, Jaden McCash. Friday, Paul McPherson. I will be back Tuesday night with another candidate in that race. Who's Left Live? John Whetstone is my guest. Thursday, as always, every Thursday morning, Concerned Clergy of Indianapolis drops their podcast with us on Progressive Indiana Network. And Thursday night, I will be back for another virtual town hall with State Senate candidate Cliff Marsiglio. Lots going on. Also, check out the Recovered Republican here, part of the Progressive Indiana Network. She posts on Saturdays. I can't fit all that on the screen. She had a great one yesterday with Devin Wellington in House District 29. Again, follow us wherever you are online at Progressive Indiana Network on TikTok and Blue Sky, it's PIN Indiana. You can find me on most social media sites at Who's Left. Email me at scott@whosleft.us. All right, I think that covers us. On behalf of my guests today, Marsha Fleming and Isaac Chapman-Whitehead, I am Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.